The alien Empress confronted a Deathworlder, and everything changed. Dr. Marcus Daniels stood in the midst of the chaos. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burning metal and the sharp sound of distant explosions. It had been days since the attack started, but the battle raged on. The sky, once a bright blue, was now a smoky gray, the sun barely visible through the thick clouds of dust. He had been a medic for years, trained to save lives, to heal the wounded. But in the face of an invasion like this, it felt as though his training had failed him. The world was burning, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The enemy was ruthless, an alien force known only as the HFY. Their ships were enormous, casting long shadows over the devastated cities below. Their soldiers were fast and deadly, their weapons unlike anything humanity had ever seen. The HFY had come to conquer Earth, and no one was prepared for the scale of their invasion. Dr. Daniels crouched beside a fallen soldier, his hands shaking as he tried to stop the bleeding. He had no time to mourn the loss of his comrades, no time to think about what had happened to the world. There was only the next life to save, the next person who needed his help. But there weren't enough supplies, and there were too many wounded. Each day, the situation worsened. There were whispers in the halls of the medical tents, rumors of cities falling, of resistance forces being overwhelmed. Dr. Daniels had seen the reports. Entire regions were lost. The HFY were advancing at a terrifying speed, and humanity was losing the war. His mind raced as he worked. He tried to push the fear down, to focus on the task at hand. But in his heart, he knew the truth. Humanity was fighting a losing battle. The invasion was too powerful, too overwhelming. As he stood to move on to the next patient, a soldier stumbled past him, his face pale and drenched in sweat. "Doctor," the soldier gasped. It's over. The city's gone. We've lost." Before he could finish, the soldier collapsed, his breath shallow. Dr. Daniels knelt beside him, but there was nothing he could do. The soldier's chest was a gaping wound, and there was too much blood. He felt the weight of the hopelessness sink deeper into his bones. The HFY didn't care about the soldiers, the civilians, or the wounded. They were here to conquer, to take Earth, to erase everything in their path. Dr. Daniels' medical training had prepared him for a lot, but nothing could prepare him for the sight of an entire world crumbling before his eyes. His thoughts drifted to his family. He hadn't spoken to them in weeks, and now he feared he might never see them again. He pushed the thought aside. There was no room for personal feelings in the middle of a war. He had a job to do. The hours blurred into each other. He worked without stopping, bandaging wounds, administering painkillers, and doing his best to stabilize the dying. There were too many of them and too few medics. The hospital tents were overflowing, with soldiers and civilians alike. It was a scene of utter chaos, and yet Dr. Daniels found a strange calm within himself. This was his calling, after all, to help, to heal. But no matter how hard he worked, the death toll continued to climb. There was nothing he could do to stop it. Then came the day that changed everything. The day Dr. Daniels was called to the front lines. The commanders had ordered all medics to report to the battlefield. The situation had reached a critical point. As Dr. Daniels walked toward the battlefield, he saw the devastation firsthand. Buildings were reduced to rubble, smoke and fire rising from the ruins. The HFY ships hovered above, casting long, dark shadows over the land. The sound of gunfire was constant, and the screams of the wounded filled the air. A soldier called out to him as he entered the area. "Doc, we need you over here." Dr. Daniels rushed toward the voice, his heart pounding. He arrived to find a group of soldiers pinned down by enemy fire. There was no time to think. He rushed in, pulling one of the soldiers to safety, applying a quick tourniquet to stop the bleeding. As he worked, he saw one of the HFY soldiers advancing toward him. It was like nothing he had ever seen, tall, with a dark, armored exoskeleton that gleamed in the dim light. Its face was obscured by a helmet, but its eyes glowed with a fierce red light. Without thinking, Dr. Daniels grabbed a nearby rifle and fired. The shot was a lucky one, and the alien fell, crumpling to the ground. But there was no time to celebrate. More of them were coming. "Doc, move!" a soldier shouted, pulling him back. Dr. Daniels didn't hesitate. He ran with the soldier, firing his weapon as they made their way to safety. But as they reached the edge of the battlefield, an explosion rocked the ground beneath them. Dr. Daniels was thrown to the ground, his body crashing into the dirt. He felt a sharp pain in his leg, and when he looked down, he saw blood pouring from a gash in his thigh. The soldier beside him was unconscious, and Dr. Daniels could feel the world spinning around him. He tried to stay conscious, but the pain was overwhelming. His vision blurred as he lay there, waiting for help that might never come. The sounds of the battle grew distant, and everything seemed to fade away. But just before he lost consciousness, he heard a voice. It wasn't human. "Survive, human, you are needed." Marcus Daniels woke up. The first thing he felt was pain. It shot through his body like a burning wire, sharp and relentless. His head felt heavy and his limbs were numb. He tried to open his eyes, but the world around him was a blur, his vision clouded by the aftermath of the explosion. His throat felt dry, as though he hadn't had a drink in days. Slowly, the fog in his mind started to clear, and he realized he wasn't on the battlefield anymore. He was lying on something soft in what seemed to be a medical facility. The sterile smell of antiseptic and the faint hum of machinery filled the air. He blinked a few times, trying to make sense of his surroundings. "Doc, can you hear me?" The voice was familiar. It was Sergeant Miller, one of the soldiers who had been with him on the front lines. Dr. Daniels tried to sit up, but the pain in his leg made him gasp. He looked down and saw that his leg had been bandaged tightly, but it was still bleeding in places. A grimace crossed his face as he reached down, his fingers trembling slightly. "You're awake," Miller said again, his voice more relieved this time. "You gave us all quite the scare, you know." Dr. Daniels tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. Miller grabbed a cup of water and gently helped him drink. The cool liquid was like a blessing, quenching the dryness that had settled in his throat. Dr. Daniels swallowed slowly, letting the water revive him. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "A safe house," Miller replied, his tone low. "After the blast, we dragged you out of there. It wasn't easy, but we managed. You're lucky to be alive." Dr. Daniels tried to remember what had happened. The explosion, the pain, everything had been a blur after that. It didn't take long for the memories to come rushing back, fighting the ex-Hera, getting thrown to the ground, the soldier beside him collapsing. And then, the voice. He felt a shiver run down his spine as he thought about it. "You're needed, human," the voice had said. But who had spoken those words? What did it mean, and why had he heard it? His thoughts were interrupted as Miller continued speaking. "Look, Doc, there's more. You've been out for 2 days. The higher-ups think you've got something they need." "What do you mean, Doctor?" Daniels asked, his confusion deepening. "They think you're more than just a medic now. The ex-Hera attacked us with weapons we've never seen before. They have technology, stuff we can't even understand. But you, Doc, you survived. You were in the thick of it, and you're still here. There's something about you, something we don't understand." Dr. Daniels felt a chill run through him as Miller's words sank in. He knew there was something strange about the way he had survived the explosion. The pain in his leg, the blood, it was as if his body had been pushed beyond its limits. But he hadn't just survived the blast, he had killed one of the ex-Hera soldiers. How was that possible? He had no time to think about it, though, because just then the door to the small room opened. A tall figure stepped inside, the light from the hallway casting long shadows across the floor. It was someone Dr. Daniels hadn't seen before. He was wearing a military uniform with insignia he didn't recognize. The man was older, perhaps in his late 40s, with a stern face and eyes that seemed to pierce through everything they looked at. "Dr. Daniels," the man said, his voice calm but commanding. "I'm General Harris. I've been briefed on your condition." Dr. Daniels tried to sit up straighter, though the pain in his leg made it difficult. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice steady despite the confusion in his mind. "We need your help," General Harris said, stepping closer. "You're more than just a survivor. You've become something else. You're the key to understanding the ex-Hera." The words hit Dr. Daniels like a punch to the gut. How could he possibly be the key? He was just a medic, a man trying to save lives in the middle of a war he couldn't control. He had no special powers. He had no knowledge of alien technology. He was just a man trying to do his job. "I don't understand," he said, shaking his head. "I'm just a doctor. I don't know anything about their weapons or their plans." "You survived, Dr. Daniels," Harris said, his tone softening. "And that's something the ex-Hera don't understand. We've been studying them for months, and we've learned a lot about their technology. But the one thing we can't figure out is why some humans seem to have this incredible ability to adapt to their weapons, survive against all odds. You're one of those people." Dr. Daniels looked at Harris in disbelief. I don't have any special ability, he said quietly. Harris's eyes narrowed. Maybe not yet, but you will. The general paused for a moment as if considering something. We're going to offer you a choice, Dr. Daniels. You can go back to Earth where the war is already lost, or you can come with us. We've developed a procedure, a new type of technology. It could change everything. It could give you the strength to fight the Ex-Hara on their level. Dr. Daniels' mind raced. The choice seemed impossible. Go back to Earth to the people he loved and face certain death, or take a chance with this mysterious procedure and hope that it could somehow give him the power to fight back. Why me? He asked, still trying to make sense of it all. Because you've proven that you're capable of surviving. Because the Ex-Hara fear you, Hara said, his voice lowering. They don't understand humans, Dr. Daniels. They don't understand our strength, our will to survive. They think we're weak, but they're wrong. The words hung in the air, heavy and filled with meaning. Dr. Daniels didn't know what to think, but something inside him stirred. The idea of being able to fight back, of actually standing a chance against the Ex-Hara, was tempting. His body had already endured so much, and it seemed that this was the moment when everything would change. I'll do it, Dr. Daniels said quietly, his voice firm. He didn't know what the procedure would entail or if it would even work. But in that moment, he knew that he had no other choice. The future of humanity and his own survival depended on the decision he had just made. General Harris gave a small nod. Good, we start tomorrow, Doctor. Marcus Daniels sat in a small, sterile room, the cool metal table before him reflecting the harsh, artificial light. He had spent the last few hours listening to General Harris and a team of scientists explain the procedure. The details were vague, but it seemed as though the procedure was both a test and a last-ditch effort to give humanity a fighting chance. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the machines in the corner. Dr. Daniels felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had been through a lot in his life, a war, losing his leg, countless hours spent trying to save others, but this felt different. The uncertainty of what lay ahead, the unknown procedure, the mysterious technology, all weighed heavily on him, but there was no turning back now. You sure about this? A voice suddenly interrupted his thoughts. Dr. Daniels looked up to see Sergeant Miller standing in the doorway, his face serious. The soldier had been with him since the first days of the invasion, and despite the war and its horrors, Miller was a familiar face, someone he could trust. I don't really have a choice, do I? Daniels said with a forced smile. Miller stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. No, I guess you don't, but you know not everyone would go through with this. You're a damn tough guy, Doctor. Daniels looked down at the prosthetic leg that had saved his life after the blast. It was still wrapped in bandages, and despite the pain that pulsed through his body, it had already become a part of him. He had learned to rely on it, even if he didn't fully understand the technology behind it. I'm not tough, Daniels said quietly. I'm just doing what I have to do to survive. Miller studied him for a moment, then shook his head. I don't think you really understand what you're about to do. They're going to change you. They're going to give you something. I don't know if I'd want it. I'm not doing this because I want to, Daniels replied, his voice firm. I'm doing it because humanity needs me. The Ex-Hara won't stop until we're gone, and I won't let that happen. Miller nodded, though there was a hint of doubt in his eyes. Just don't lose yourself in all of this, Doc. You're still human. Daniels looked at him, but before he could reply, the door opened, and General Harris entered, followed by a team of scientists in lab coats. The general's face was as serious as ever, but there was a flicker of something else behind his eyes, maybe hope or maybe fear. Ready? Harris asked, his voice steady. Daniels stood up, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Let's do it! The scientists led him down a long hallway, the white walls stretching on either side. He could hear the faint sounds of machinery and the low murmur of voices from behind closed doors. As they approached a large room at the end of the hall, Dr. Daniels couldn't help but wonder what kind of changes they would make to him. The procedure was shrouded in secrecy, and he hadn't been told everything. All he knew was that the process involved both alien technology and human science, and the results were meant to enhance him, physically and mentally. The room was stark, with bright overhead lights casting shadows on the walls. A large, metallic chair sat in the center, surrounded by strange-looking equipment. Tubes, wires, and blinking lights connected to monitors and machines that seemed to hum with energy. In the corner, a tall glass cylinder contained a strange liquid bubbling quietly. "We'll begin soon," Harris said, his voice calm but firm. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Daniels glanced at the chair and then back at the general. "I have to." "All right," Harris said, motioning to the scientists. "Get him ready." The team moved swiftly, preparing the machines and attaching sensors to his body. Dr. Daniels felt the cold metal of the chair as he sat down, strapping himself in. He wasn't sure if the feeling in his chest was anxiety or determination, but his hands were shaking. One of the scientists approached him with a syringe filled with a glowing blue liquid. "This will begin the process," she said softly, her voice reassuring. Daniels nodded, bracing himself for what was to come. The needle entered his arm, and he flinched at the coldness that spread through his veins. For a moment, everything went dark, and he felt a strange sensation, like his body was being pulled apart and then put back together again. The pain came next. It was excruciating, unlike anything he had ever felt before. His bones felt like they were being stretched and broken, and every nerve in his body screamed in protest. His heart raced, and he could feel sweat dripping down his face. But through the pain, there was something else, a strange, almost electric feeling as though his body was adapting, evolving. "Stay with us, Dr. Daniels," one of the scientists said, her voice distant but clear. "It's almost over." The pain intensified for what felt like an eternity. He gritted his teeth, focusing on the promise of survival, the promise of doing something that could change the tide of the war. For a moment, he thought he might pass out, but then the pain began to subside. The burning sensation faded, and he felt a strange new energy coursing through his body. Slowly, he opened his eyes. The world seemed brighter, clearer. The room, once distant and blurry, was sharp and defined. He could hear the hum of the machines more clearly, the ticking of the clocks on the walls. His senses were heightened, and for the first time in his life he felt truly alive. But something else had changed, too. His body was different. He could feel the strength in his muscles, the new power that surged through him. He looked down at his leg, the prosthetic leg. It had changed, too. The metal surface was now smoother, more polished, almost as if it had merged with his own flesh. He flexed it experimentally, and a feeling of connection washed over him. It was like it was part of him now, not just an object, but an extension of his own body. "Dr. Daniels, how do you feel?" Harris's voice broke through his thoughts. Daniels looked up at him, his body still adjusting to the changes. He took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling with ease. "I feel different," he said, his voice steady. "That's to be expected," Harris said, nodding. "You've just undergone a major transformation. Your body is now enhanced, faster, stronger, and more resilient than ever before. You become something more than human." Daniels stood up, testing his newfound strength. He felt lighter, faster, and more in control. The world seemed to move in slow motion around him, as though he could react to everything with perfect precision. His heart pounded, not from fear or exertion, but from the adrenaline coursing through his veins. This was it, the beginning of something new. But as the moment of realization set in, a new sense of responsibility washed over him. He had been changed, transformed into something beyond what he had been. His body had become a weapon, and with it came a responsibility he couldn't ignore. "How soon can I go back out there?" Dr. Daniels asked, his voice calm but firm. "As soon as you're ready," Harris replied. Daniels nodded. "I'm ready." The war wasn't over yet, and now he was prepared to fight in a way he never had before. Dr. Marcus Daniels stood in the center of the command room, his hands clenched at his sides as he listened to the orders coming from General Harris. It had been only a week since the procedure, but he felt like a completely different person. His body had adapted to the changes quickly, and he could already feel the power within him. It was as if he had been reborn, stronger and more focused than ever before. The room was filled with military personnel, all hard at work preparing for the next phase of the war. Maps of the ex-Hera's positions covered the walls, and the tension in the air was palpable. The human resistance was losing ground, and it seemed like every day more cities fell to the invaders. Earth was on the brink of collapse, and the pressure to act weighed heavily on everyone. "We need to act fast," General Harris said, his voice low but filled with urgency. "The ex-Hera are pushing forward at an alarming rate. If we don't stop them soon, we won't have a planet left to save." Daniels looked at the general, his eyes steely and focused. He had been through a lot, but the weight of responsibility now felt heavier than ever. He had become part of something much bigger than himself, a symbol of humanity's survival and strength. But the truth was, the war was far from over. In fact, it felt like it was just beginning. "We have one chance," Harris continued. "But we need someone who can break through the ex-Hera defenses, someone who can outthink them, outfight them, and give our forces a fighting chance. Dr. Daniels, that someone is you." The general's words echoed in the room, and for a moment, Daniels felt the weight of them settle deep within him. He had undergone the procedure, been changed in ways he couldn't fully understand, and now it was time to put that change to the test. "I'm ready," Daniels said, his voice steady. Harris gave him a sharp nod. "Good. We've pinpointed the location of one of their main communication hubs. If we can destroy it, it will cripple their ability to coordinate their forces. But getting to it won't be easy. The hub is heavily guarded and will need to strike fast and hard." Daniels felt the surge of adrenaline as he listened. The mission sounded dangerous, too dangerous, but that was what made it necessary. This was their chance to hit the ex-Hera where it hurt, and he was determined to take it. "How many of us will be going?" Daniels asked. "Just you," Harris replied. "The rest of the team will be providing support from the rear. This is a one-man mission. You're our best hope." The words stung a little, but Daniels didn't let them show. He had never liked being the center of attention, but in this war, he had become the weapon humanity needed. There was no time for hesitation. The mission briefing was quick. Daniels was given a small team of elite soldiers who would escort him to the ex-Hera's heavily fortified outpost. They would provide backup, but once they reached the hub, Daniels would go in alone. He had to rely on his new abilities to get the job done. The journey to the ex-Hera stronghold was long and treacherous. The terrain was harsh, with jagged cliffs and deep ravines that made travel difficult. The team moved quickly, using the cover of darkness to stay undetected. As they approached the enemy camp, Daniels could feel the tension in the air. The ex-Hera were close, and the sense of danger was undeniable. By the time they reached the outskirts of the enemy's camp, Daniels felt the familiar rush of energy coursing through his body. His senses were sharper than ever, and his mind was focused, calculating every step with precision. "This is it," he said quietly to his team. "I'll go in alone from here. You stay hidden and provide cover if anything goes wrong." The soldiers nodded, but Daniels could see the doubt in their eyes. They had all seen the changes in him, the way he had become something more than human. Some were amazed, while others were wary. But they all knew one thing: if anyone could do this, it was Daniels. With a deep breath, Daniels stepped forward, his prosthetic leg moving smoothly with each step. The facility ahead was dark, but the faint glow of alien technology flickered in the distance. He could feel the presence of the ex-Hera soldiers guarding the perimeter, but he didn't hesitate. He had been through worse, and this time he had the advantage. His heart beat steadily, his breath calm. The new enhancements in his body allowed him to move with a quiet grace, blending into the shadows. As he approached the gates of the outpost, he heard the faint click of alien weapons and the low murmur of voices. He stopped for a moment, listening, then made his move. In a blur of motion, he disabled the first guard with a swift strike to the neck. The ex-Hera soldier fell silently to the ground, and Daniels quickly hid the body in a nearby alcove. He didn't have time to waste. He continued moving, his movements fluid and precise. The further he went, the more confident he became in his new abilities. He could hear everything, see everything, even anticipate the guards' movements before they made them. His body had become an extension of his mind, fast, strong, and relentless. Finally, he reached the communications hub. It was a massive structure, covered in alien symbols and strange technology. The ex-Hera had clearly invested a lot of resources into it, but Daniels didn't hesitate. He moved to the control panel and began working quickly, his hands moving with practiced ease. He could feel the hum of the machines beneath his fingers, but he knew what he needed to do. The task was simple: plant the explosives, set the timer, and get out before the whole place went up in flames. He took a deep breath and placed the explosives, his mind focused on the task at hand. He didn't think about what would happen next. He didn't think about the risk. He just moved, knowing that this was their chance to strike back. Once the explosives were in place, he set the timer and sprinted toward the exit. As he made his way back to the perimeter, he could hear the alarms blaring. The ex-Hera had discovered the breach. But it was too late. The damage had been done. He reached the rendezvous point just as the explosion rang out, the ground shaking beneath his feet. The facility was gone, reduced to rubble, and with it, the Ex-Hara's ability to communicate across their forces. The mission had been a success. Dr. Daniels stood, his chest rising and falling with each breath. He had done it. But as the dust settled and the sound of the explosion faded, he realized that this was only the beginning. The war was far from over, and humanity's survival depended on what came next. He turned to his team, who were now emerging from their hiding spots. They had seen what he was capable of, what he had become. And in that moment, Daniels knew that they no longer saw him as just a medic. He was something more. He was the future of humanity's fight for survival. The mission was over, but the war was just beginning. And Dr. Marcus Daniels was ready, Doctor. Marcus Daniels stood at the edge of the ruined battlefield, the remnants of the Ex-Hara facility smoldering behind him. The explosion had done its job, crippling the enemy's communications and slowing their advance, but the war was far from over. The ground was littered with the wreckage of what had once been a key stronghold for the invaders. He had done what he had come to do. The mission was a success, but the feeling of victory was fleeting. He looked around at the soldiers who had been with him, their faces grim and tired. No one had expected this fight to be easy, but seeing the destruction in front of them made it all too real. The Ex-Hara were powerful, relentless, and they would not stop until humanity was wiped from existence. "I hope this buys us some time," Daniels said, his voice low as he surveyed the damage. Sergeant Miller, who had been with him every step of the way, nodded. "It should. But time won't win this war. We need more than just a few victories like this." Daniels didn't respond immediately. Miller was right. They needed more than just small wins. The Ex-Hara were a force to be reckoned with, and one successful mission wasn't enough to change the course of the war. Daniels had become something more than human, but even his enhanced abilities couldn't win this fight alone. "We're not done yet," Daniels said after a long pause. "We've got to keep pushing." The mission had been a turning point, but it was also a reminder of how much humanity still had to face. The war had taken everything from him, from his body to his world, but it had also given him something new: strength, focus, power, and with that power came responsibility. He couldn't afford to lose sight of that, not now. The team made their way back to the resistance camp, the journey taking hours through harsh terrain. The wind had picked up, and the air felt colder than usual, a constant reminder of how much of the world had been lost. As they walked, Daniels felt the weight of what he had become pressing down on him. The transformation had given him new abilities, but it had also made him something different. A weapon, a tool of war. And as much as he wanted to believe in his ability to save humanity, he knew that it wasn't enough. Not yet. When they finally arrived at the camp, General Harris was waiting for them, his expression as stern as always. The sight of the general made Daniels uneasy. The man was a leader, but he was also someone who knew the cost of war all too well. Harris had always been pragmatic, focused on the mission and the bigger picture, but Daniels wasn't sure if that was enough anymore. The war had changed everyone, and he wondered if the general had begun to see humanity as something that could be used and discarded like any other tool. "Report," Harris said, as Daniels and Miller approached. Daniels stepped forward, the weight of the mission still fresh in his mind. "The communications hub is destroyed. We've delayed their advance, but we've only bought ourselves a little time." Harris nodded, his face expressionless. "That's good news, but it's not enough. The Ex-Hara are still advancing. We've lost contact with several of our frontline units. We need a plan to stop them." The conversation that followed was a blur of military strategy and tactics. Daniels listened intently, but in the back of his mind, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. No matter how many battles they won, no matter how many times they struck at the Ex-Hara, the invaders kept coming. They were relentless. And as much as the human forces tried to push back, it seemed as though the Ex-Hara were always one step ahead. Later that evening, as Daniels sat alone in a small tent, he reflected on everything that had happened. His new abilities had made him a key player in the war, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing something in the process. He had been changed, altered in ways he didn't fully understand. He was stronger, faster, and more capable than ever, but at what cost? He felt more distant from his humanity than ever before. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that the war wasn't just about defeating the Ex-Hara. It was about something deeper, something he hadn't quite figured out yet. As the days passed, the war continued to escalate. The Ex-Hera pushed forward relentlessly, and humanity fought back with everything they had left. Daniels was in the thick of it, using his enhanced abilities to take down Ex-Hera forces and protect the resistance. But despite the victories, there were too many losses. Too many good people were dying. One night, as Daniels prepared for another mission, he found himself standing at the edge of the camp, staring out into the dark horizon. The wind was quiet now, and the world around him felt eerily still. He could feel the weight of everything bearing down on him, the war, the death, the constant struggle. And in that moment he realized something. He had been changed by the procedure, but he hadn't become a different person. He was still Marcus Daniels, the same man who had once been a medic, a healer, someone who wanted to save lives. But the war had taken that part of him. It had turned him into a weapon. And as much as he hated it, he knew that he had to embrace that side of himself if he wanted to keep fighting. "I can't do this alone," he whispered to himself, "but I have to keep going." The next day, Daniels was assigned to a critical mission, a direct assault on one of the Ex-Hera's main strongholds. It was a suicide mission, one that had little chance of success. But the resistance had no choice. They needed to strike at the heart of the enemy's forces, and Daniels was the only one who could get in and out without being detected. He had no illusions about the danger. He knew the odds were stacked against him. But he had a job to do, and he wasn't about to back down. Not now, not when humanity's future was on the line. The mission was brutal. The Ex-Hera stronghold was well guarded, and the resistance forces were outnumbered and outgunned. But Daniels moved like a shadow, his enhanced abilities allowing him to slip past guards and take down enemies with precision. He felt like a machine, calculating every movement, every decision. But the further he went into the stronghold, the more he realized how much he had become like the weapon they had made him. The human side of him was still there, buried deep inside, but the more he fought, the more it felt like he was losing himself. By the time Daniels reached the core of the stronghold, he was exhausted. His body ached, but he didn't stop. He planted the explosives, set the timer, and began to make his way back. But as he moved through the facility, he was cornered by a group of Ex-Hera soldiers. They had been waiting for him. The fight was fierce. Daniels fought with everything he had, using every skill he had learned, every ounce of strength the procedure had given him. But the Ex-Hera were relentless. The more he fought, the more he realized just how far he had come from the man he once was. When the explosion finally went off, shaking the entire facility, Daniels felt a sense of finality. The mission had been a success, but at what cost? He had survived, barely, but in the process he had lost something important. As the dust settled, Daniels stood alone in the wreckage, feeling both victorious and hollow. The war was far from over, and the fight for humanity's survival was just beginning. But one thing was certain: he would continue to fight, because in the end, that was all he could do.